All right, so this is a slide where we kind of left off on yesterday, where talking about, again, Ray Bradbury, member, author that we're dealing with from The Pedestrian, and then same thing happening here with Fahrenheit 451, where at the very end we're kind of talking about some things that he was maybe possibly foreseeing, so the use of iPhones, big screen TVs, and technology, things along those lines. One of the terms that people kind of struggle with a little bit is going to be very early on. Guy's wife's name is Millie. And Millie has seashells, which are basically going to be the equivalent of like wireless earbuds that are going to be in her ear. So they're not going to be using headphones, iPods, earbud terminology. But anytime they make reference to seashells, it would essentially be the same thing as having earbuds going on. But certainly there's that dependency that's going to be going on with TV. But then also there's going to be these issues which we were touching on towards the end of class yesterday, where you have rise in violence, where not only that nuclear fear that could be taking place with Cold War, but also just violence between individuals that would be more localized, besides what's going on a global scale. You have growing illiteracy, which is going to be making sense in the case of why would people not be able to read so well in this futuristic world? Because the books are being taken away and you're solely dealing with only TV. So if Tyler cannot have a book, then the idea is you're not probably going to lose the ability to read and recognize things. Now, that part's going to be a little bit drastic because I'm sure there's still going to be like words that would be showing up with billboards and things of that nature, but that dependency, that close reading kind of idea wouldn't be taking place. And then this big thing here, condensation of information, where you have sound bites or snippets of information as opposed to you getting a full story. So as opposed to knowing what is truly going on and just getting little glimpses, you can have at that point then a public that not only could be illiterate with lack of ability to read, but also could be ignorant if you're unable to think of what your own possible ideas are. And one of the big things would be if you take away the ability to read, what's probably a hope that would be taking place from a government aspect as well. If you can't read it and you can't express it, sooner or later you can't understand it and you can't think it. You know, if the word starts to kind of get taken away, then how do you begin to express something that you're unable to verbalize? And so that's part of the idea that would be happening. And some would argue that, that's kind of happening already with texting where you have like elimination of words, but we're certainly not at the point where, you don't have access to what those things would be. This statistic we saw earlier, but I think it'd be good to remind us to kind of write this down. 1945, so you're coming to the end of World War II. Within the whole entire United States, you have less than 10,000 TVs in homes. Okay, sure, there might be some TVs in government areas or things like that, but within public homes, populace, you got less than 10,000 TVs. By 1950, so you're only going 5 years down the road. Now, this isn't number of homes, but this would be number of sets. Now you're up to more than 6 million TVs in the United States. So within a 5-year period, you're going from 10,000 all the way up to 6 million. And then by 1960, and this is going to be past what's going on with Fahrenheit 451 since it's published in 1953, but in 1960, that's tenfold, where now you're up to 60 million TVs in the United States. So, when we have taking a look at it from a reading standpoint, why all this concern about TVs? Well, he's right here in the midst of this explosion that's taking place where, you have less than 10,000, and then within 5 years, you're all the way up to 6 million. That is certainly a gigantic, climb that would be taking place. The idea of having a whole giant screen TV that would be covering a person's wall, the way it ends up within the book, would be something that in 1953 you're probably going to happen, but certainly in today's world, you could argue it's a good idea, and it's something that would be, I don't know if practical would be the right word, but it would be something that certainly could happen. Well, probably the largest TV that you could probably pick up at like a Sam's Club or a Target, Best Buy. Well, you could certainly get 70-inch easily. I don't know in store how 80. And then you get into projectors and all that kind of stuff. Then at that point, you can do whatever you want. Would anyone want 3 huge TVs in the room at one time? Someone watching an NFL playoff game over here, another playoff game over here, and by the way, I'm going to be watching something else, because we're at this side. You're just coming to the end of college football bowl season. If some folks, hey, I watch all 4 bowl games at one time, they would like to do that in kind of like their own virtual reality world that would certainly be taking place. If you take athletics, would there be other shows that people would try to watch 2 at a time, 3 at a time? Probably. I would think so. And even with the ways in which computers are going to get used and whatnot, you could have game going on one screen, you could have something else going on the other. I don't know exactly when we're doing Xbox and PlayStation simultaneously. PlayStation. Only PlayStation. But could you be doing multiple, TVs or shows, movies, games simultaneously? Yeah, I think people would certainly be willing to at least try that out. Now, is that where you could see it happening all over the place on such a wide-scale basis? Probably would say no, but 15 years ago, not many people thought you'd be interacting with a phone, TV, video, watch, or something like that, fingerprint sensors, and all those kinds of things. And certainly in 1945, no one was thinking that there would be 60 million TV sets, within a 15-year period. But that's why this type of technology is the one that he is certainly going to be focusing on so much, like he did with the pedestrian, and like he is to a certain extent within Fahrenheit 451. Some things are still a little off. The price tag for a TV is about $2,000 in the book. That would be covering up a whole entire wall. So those things are kind of skewed a little bit as to what that overall price tag would actually be. But you find out that's a third of what he would be making his salary on. So to have a wall TV that Hayden's going to set up here, it would take a third of his salary as a firefighter or whatever to have that luxury item. Which some people would be willing to pay. All right. We were mentioning yesterday some things here with Cold War and taking a look at this idea. The big concern that was happening kind of like on that global scale, international scale, as the 1950s and Cold War was progressing, was a fear about government becoming all too powerful. And so this would definitely be an idea here to write down. I go this one word for word. As the 1950s and Cold War progressed, Bradbury saw the government taking a great deal of power over the people, and this is something that certainly was causing worry for him. This was of primary concern. The question that basically he would be throwing out there then would be, how could a government with too much power prove to be dangerous? That's concept here that he's going to be exploring, that we'll be throwing out here and discussing in a moment. So 1950s, Cold War's progressing. Bradbury's seeing an area where government could be taking a great deal of power over the people, and this is something that would be worrying him. This could be foreign governments, and also could be within his own government as well. Sure. Beyond they could take things away from people, or they could imprison people, how can a government with too much power be considered dangerous? And thinking more in context of today, not just necessarily 1950s. How's that going to impact you and me? Say, like, assuming we live under such a government, like.
Okay. So, say if our government is really greedy and they want more land and they want to fight, then some people can be drafted and stuff, and they can be able to have to deal with that.
Okay, so if you're looking at land acquisition,
yeah.
Conflicts, wars, probably when it comes to draft, 1960s to 70s is what comes to mind most for people with Vietnam. So you could have an institution where there be draft taking place. You could have a change in law, and you got a lot of European laws, countries that do this, where between ages of 18 and 25, you have to at least serve 1 to 2 years within the military. So it could be draft where, hey, you're of age, we're going to use you now, or it could be something where within a 5, 6, 7 year period, people choose that they be in the military, but you certainly could be impacting the futures that certain folks would want. If you have a government that's becoming greedy and you're watching, like old movies from King Arthur era and whatnot, you hear about taxes and all that kind of stuff, money that could be happening. Government, what else? And probably the best parallels I think that people would tend to think of with the dystopian kind of future that's being set up here in Fahrenheit 451 would be with that of China and North Korea. I mentioned Nazi Germany earlier, with the idea that there would be suppression of information. For most of us, if we want to figure something out, use our brain for a little bit, then ask Siri or Alexa, do a quick Google search. If you do a search here, it's no mystery that if you do a search in other parts of the world, that information that you get is going to be filtered. Because some things are going to be allowed, some things are not going to be allowed to have access to. So there might not be where, land acquisition going to the military, where now Bill's going to be drafted and he's in the military affected directly in that way. But if you have lack of access to information, or if you have lack of access to money and certain goods, that can certainly change the viewpoint or the scope of what things that you're going to have when it comes to living your daily life and opportunities that you're interested in. And like, what do we think of when, like, I think that's a word that we throw around quite a bit without kind of going into detail as to what does it mean to have freedoms. But
people are living in like third world countries.
well, and that's where it comes, and that's where it kind of comes into question as to, okay, what do you view as wanting to be free? There was about the same time that the book gets published, there was a U.S. historian philosopher, H.L. Mencken, who said people don't want to be free, people want to be safe. And then the idea, and this really became a big topic post 9/11, when you're dealing with more security in airports and things like that, where do you want to have absolute freedom that really no one's really going to have anywhere, within the world, or would you rather be safe and know that there's not going to be harm coming your way? And that's not an easy question to answer, for anyone. When we think of freedom, I think we think about the ability to speak your mind, say what you want, access to information, practice religion, pursue whatever kind of career you want, not dealing with certain gender kind of roles or stereotypes and things like that. And certainly look in other parts of the world, and that's not necessarily there. One of the big decisions that you folks are going to have in the next couple of years, what are you going to do after graduation? And in some ways, folks would look at some European countries where education after high school is easier, more affordable, more accessible as being a gain freedom that you don't necessarily have here, where you can choose to go to college, but there's also going to be a price tag that's going to come along with that, and that can certainly go a big way of influence. So, we certainly have a lot of freedoms, and if you were to go into some other parts of the world, I think you would appreciate these freedoms a little more, but at the same time, we certainly have some limitations that are going to be out there. International scale that involved the U.S. What was the big news story last night? There was an assassination that took place in drone, in Iraq. The U.S. has taken responsibility for it. There hasn't been a whole lot of details about it. So when the term assassination takes place, the context of it, folks can kind of look at it as being a negative thing. Is it a positive that it happens for the U.S. with what the overall end result was? That's something that kind of could be determined. But what happens if you do have governments become too powerful? Does it become too chaotic, where you have lax kind of laws and regulations taking place on the national scale? I'm not saying that's the case with what happened yesterday, but there's certainly some concerns about fallout and how we're going to do some relations taking place between Iran and the United States. Talk about military drafts and whatnot. If you have an explosion of conflict taking place, you could be taking a look to their service. So there's certainly a lot of these things all kind of work together, where the fear of is something being done on the behalf the way that you want it to be is an idea that Bradbury's certainly taking a look at. Make sure you just sign out. Setting. So here we're taking a look at what's going on in the novel. 24th century. So how many hundreds of years forward are we going? Not 300. This is where it gets confusing. So we're in the 2000s, the 21st century. So this is going into the 24th century, and it's never explicitly stated you're in the year 2341 or 2351 but you're able to come up with based on some clues that are kind of given with history that we're 300 years forward. So it's a futuristic society. Already mentioned, books are considered to be dangerous and illegal, and nobody is supposed to own them. So this could be a religious book like the Bible, but this also could be any kind of text that you would be looking at. Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, prose. If you have a book, it would be removed from you, and you would certainly be facing punishment for it. If you have the firefighters who are coming over to get the book, they're going to set the books on fire, and if your house happens to go on fire as well, that's just a, oh well, it happens, what are we going to do about it? So for you to have any kind of book with you would certainly be contraband, and you'd be putting not only yourself in harm's way, but also folks who would be close to you, friends, family, associates. If you associate with someone who you unknowingly know has a book, then you're also going to be considered a suspect as well. So this is where we talked about that Red Scare, where you're going, this person's a communist, and that's having a negative impact on them. And folks, if they know, if you are accused of having a book, then certainly other folks are going to be accused if they associate with you of having illegal activity as well. How do you find out if someone has a book? Usually they're not going to go yet. Sometimes they might. But from the government standpoint, how are they going to find out if they have a book? Tracking. Tracking. So, we talk about artificial intelligence, quite a bit AI. That kind of stuff is going to be used within the course of the text. When you think of fire stations, these little Dalmatians that sit at the corner that everyone loves. They have a hound also for this fire department, the 451, so that's going to be a mechanical hound. Which is something that is meant to sniff out literature, and if it finds you, it's going to hold on, it's going to attack you, and there's certainly be some consequences to pay. Mechanical hound. Science fiction lets you do some wonderful things, Ethan. And it also is going to have a needle where it can protract and then also inject you with poison, which is going to have some damaging effects as well. So there's certainly the idea of not only are they illegal, but there is that danger element that goes along with it. So if you all constantly have this idea that, hey, you're facing jail time or punishment, whatever, for having a book, that's not something that you want to have, then, you have a society as a whole that's already, I don't want anything to do with this, and they're willingly not dealing with those books. As a result, folks are going to be more happy to be watching the screens of TV because that's not something that you're going to be facing punishment for, and you don't have to worry about thinking too hard and things of that nature. Any books, as already mentioned, if they are found, they are going to be burned, so they'll get to that temperature of Fahrenheit 451, and then they're going to be up in smoke at that point. And already mentioned this, so rather than having a firefighter prevent a fire, they're certainly going to do what they are in order to start them. So get rid of the books as soon as you possibly can. All right, big word that we're going to associate with Fahrenheit 451, dystopia. So we need definition for this one. If it's a dystopic novel, if you're dealing with a dystopia, this means you're dealing with a future that is bleak, dark, and dreary. Total opposite of what you would have with a utopia. Utopia is meant to be a perfect society where everything works the way that you would want it to be. It would be the ideal place to be. A dystopic novel is going to be one where it's going to be in the future, and it tends to have a technological aspect to it where things are bleak, dark, and overall dreary. So there are negative consequences taking place as opposed to positive, beneficial things that are happening. So Fahrenheit 451, science fiction novel, technologically based in the future, is going to be the perfect storm for it to be considered dystopic. Two main themes that we're going to be taking a look at is going to be this idea of censorship and the ignorance of knowledge. So you have the elimination of information, or at least the limiting of information, and then with that limiting of information, you have this idea of that ignorance of knowledge. And keep in mind, when we talk about someone being ignorant, or the idea of ignorance has nothing to do with polite and respectful and things like that, but it's literally a lack of knowledge. You simply don't know. If a person is ignorant, you simply do not know. You don't have access to that information. So, bleak world, but due to the lack of knowledge, people therefore may not recognize that bleak, dark, dreary society environment that ultimately they're going to be living in. Censorship. What is it? What do we mean by it? Censorship textbook definition is simply going to be that suppression or elimination of any kind of material that is going to cause some type of question for those in power. So in this case, we're going to take a look at some kind of government form. So if it's going to be considered to be objectionable, harmful, sensitive, inconvenient to that government or media organization, then it would get censored at that point. Censorship doesn't simply mean that there are swear words in it or language that's going to be inappropriate, in a lewd kind of sense. But censorship can be the suppression or limitation of the amount of information that's coming out. When we were doing the short stories, we were talking about subjective and objective. A lot of things that tend to be censored would be more subjective, where you have the emotional viewpoint coming across, as opposed to something that's going to be objective, that tends to be more cut and dry, fact-based. But you might have a suppression of facts. You might have a changing of facts. You could even have, certainly a term that gets used a lot today, a fake news kind of concept. You could have an alteration of facts so that people think one thing is going on when the absolute opposite could be taking place. Without using terminology that's going on up here, why would you censor anything? Say knowledge. Okay. Yeah. So if there's a certain sure. And you'll have, with things dealing like FBI, CIA, there'll be certain kind of like statute of limitations where after X number of years documents can become released, and it certainly depends upon what some of those cases are. So why something could be censored in a good way, potentially could be for personal security, national security. She's not going to tell me. She better not tell me. That would be something that she would want to be censored so that there's not going to be like identity theft taking place. You know, that's something you want to find out probably in the next couple of years. It begins with a number between 0 and 9 and ends with a number between 0 and 9. Good luck. They're going. So, there's certainly some pieces of information you don't want to be disseminated. And part of that could be kind of like national security. You could also have information that you want to be censored so that certain viewpoints are not being brought about, especially if those are going in opposition of whatever person could be in power. And if you're dealing with certain areas such as schools, they're going to be very different from like a public setting where you can have various types of things.
I have two republics. South Park.
Keep going.
South Park.
Talking about cartoon.
South Park. I'm pretty sure you all know that they have a reputation of being banned or censored in countries, especially the game having half of it. The first game having half of it censored in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the whole, living through China.
So when you deal with things when you get into things that are going to deal with certainly politics, religion, and then you're getting into not topics that are necessarily going to be taboo per se, but controversial, depending upon how that area, whether you're dealing with a culture, whether you're dealing with a government, ideas, however you want that to be looked at, yeah, there's going to be content that's going to be kind of considered questionable. Why do you want to censor something? Basically, Hayden's first thing was to limit certain knowledge, to limit certain ideas. Do we do censorship within our own homes in some cases? Yeah. If you have parental controls that are on your cable box or whatever, there's a form of censorship that mom, dad, grandma, whoever are doing, are limiting certain content to you. Now, as people become older, we kind of think that you're going to start to get more access to those things. I don't think it's censorship in the classic sense where, we're not going to make that information accessible to anyone. I guess it probably depends what it's document. Like my social security card, I have in the safe so that should anything ever happen, at least I still have that information. Marriage license, birth certificate. It's not that I don't want you to read that, but I want it to be safe. or we're putting it under the lock and key so you can never have it. Am I putting it under the lock and key so if, unfortunately some situation happens at my home, or that document still safe, I'd say that's not going to be sensitive. Right. But, if we come across this book and go, oh, these ideas are too theoretical, agents can never see this, we have to put this, in the most remote location possible, then yeah, at that point, we're certainly doing it. I'm not sure. Haven't gone that far quite yet. Dangers of censorship certainly could be that, that limiting of knowledge, could be that ignorance, could be that unknowing of what's going on. Anything beyond simply just not learning stuff, so far as a danger of censorship. Anything beyond is just limited information. Say, I never let my kids watch TV other than local news or national news. So, talk about South Park out of the picture. Anything on Cartoon Network out of the picture. Netflix, not going to get it. Disney Plus, absolutely not. Censorship. What can they learn from a Disney movie? No Disney Plus. No Hulu. No YouTube TV. So, say, and we do have this say though that my youngest daughter, third grade, so she does not get access to, Disney, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, whatever you want. Everything is simply going to be news-based. She's not going to have cell phones. There's not going to be any social media apps within her future or anything along those lines. What risk do I end up running as a parent, potentially, for her as she gets older? You know what? Could be bad, could be good, wait to see. But if Katie starts having a conversation with her about Aladdin and all the good morals that are going to be happening in there or whatnot, and she has no basis of what's going on, could she feel kind of disengaged and outside of, the general knowledge of what's going on? Sure. So, censorship, there can be things that you're trying to protect people, and certainly if that can go too far where you end up having a person end up feel more isolated, and then they don't have the ability to necessarily interact. So it's not necessarily just going to be political type of things with censorship happening, but you could have various forms, within family setups or whatnot. The ignorance of knowledge, and again, ignorance, nothing to do with someone's personality, more so just of that lack of knowledge, focusing on the importance of learning and how it impacts our ability to make decisions, and really the big thing, how to think for oneself, how to express. If you don't have the ability to think, and you don't have the ability to understand what you're doing, then it's easy to be led to do wrong when you don't have those morals. So if Katie never watches any of those Disney movies to understand the good morals at the end, that Leah is talking about, then if you don't know what the good morals are, you don't have access to understanding what the bad things are, and may not know which direction you're being headed in. Themes to watch for. Okay, these are things that we're going to write down for specific themes that we have within Fahrenheit 451. Individual self-expression is going to be important. So the idea of individual self-expression versus things like conformity, being able to be yourself versus being what someone else would expect you to think. One of the ideas behind censorship certainly is going to be the idea of conformity, that if you don't know any better or you don't know any different, then you're not going to go against the status quo. Violence is self-destructive. This could be violence whether you're talking about, again, on a global, international scale, or something that's going to be on a little bit more personal scale. Mindless pleasure seeking and materialism make for an empty life. So if your sole aspect in life is to have the big screen TVs on all the walls and to have all the latest forms of technology or whatever kind of materialistic items you'd be looking for, that is going to make for some kind of empty life. There has to be some kind of type of personal connection that's going to be taking place in order for there to be meaning in what a person's existence would be about. And then also this one, and this is a big part with the books being destroyed, humanity should preserve and value the culture of the past. Certainly we live in the moment, and we're a lot of times thinking about what's ahead of us, but there's also the idea that you preserve the past so that you can certainly learn from it, so that you can gain information about what has worked, about what has not worked, so that you don't repeat the past if it is in a more negative sense, where this failed, this did not work. These were situations that were leading up to a rise of an Adolf Hitler or a Joseph Stalin or whatever kind of dictator you'd be looking at, so that you prevent that from happening. But you preserve, you value the culture of the past, you certainly learn from it. There's going to be a lot of history lessons kind of happening within Fahrenheit 451. Most of them are going to be wrong. But nobody knows any better because you can't fact check, you can't double check, you can't prove that this is right or this is not the case. So if someone simply says they have the knowledge, there's no other option than to go along and believe it, because you can't really dispute anything. And then a couple set of other themes. Humanity has the ability to be reborn and revived. In the wrong hands, modern technology can be dangerous. Commercialism, so again, kind of materialism, can erode spiritual values, and people lose their humanity when not able to communicate and interact with each other on a personal level. So, if you simply allow yourself to fall into, a kind of like a technological coma in a way where there's not that human interaction that's taking place, that inability to interact with each other on a personal level will kind of lead to that falling apart of humanity, which, talking about governments kind of gaining power, could make you more susceptible to a government. Sorry. And it would be a surreal moment. There's any piece of like literature that would be in paper form is considered contraband. There are references to them like billboards, so like advertisements still taking place. I'm like, you can't completely eliminate all words. So, like if you're driving, you gotta if you're going to Pittsburgh, you're going to Cleveland, you're going to Philadelphia, you have to have those kind of road signs for it. So there are words. And it never gets into specific lists of how many words are there or what. But you know there's billboards, you know there's those kinds of directions. But anything like that would be creative in book form, in poem form, that would be eradicated. Anything that would be considered like a history textbook, Mr. Washington would be out of a career because there's no way you would be able to take a look at history, because it wouldn't be. I would be out of a career because, me passing books out to all of you, boy, it's like I could go up in flames then if I'm going to be doing that kind of stuff. But there's certainly still words, but it's definitely on a limited basis. And if you were to stand up and go, hey, you know what, here's the poem I just kind of came up with off the top of my head, it's not even written down, you're still going to get looked at as, kind of illogical. Why do you need to come up with poetry? There's other things to do. That's not what you got to do. So, for Monday coming up, not a homework assignment, I would start reading parts 1 just to kind of get a feel for what's going on. If you weren't here yesterday, I did mention Google Classroom. There is the YouTube audiobook, so if you want to kind